Welcome to the series of Bhagavad Gita chapters. Chapter 2 of the Bhagavad Gita, titled Sankhya Yoga, or the Yoga of Knowledge, is one of the most important chapters of this ancient scripture. It contains 72 verses and serves as a comprehensive introduction to the core philosophical teachings of the Gita. In this chapter, Lord Krishna begins to impart his wisdom to Arjuna, who is paralyzed by grief and moral confusion. Krishna addresses Arjuna's concerns, provides clarity on the nature of the self, the concept of duty, and the principles of karma and dharma. This chapter lays the foundation for the rest of the teachings in the Bhagavad Gita. Verses 1 to 10. Arjuna's continued despair. Arjuna continues to express his sorrow and reluctance to fight. He is overwhelmed by the prospect of killing his relatives, teachers, and friends, and he sees no value in the kingdom and pleasures that might be gained from the battle. Despite his warrior duty, Arjuna is filled with compassion and doubt. He turns to Krishna for guidance, recognizing his own inability to resolve this moral dilemma. Verses 11-30. The nature of the self. Krishna begins his teachings by addressing the nature of the self, Atman. He explains that the soul is eternal, immutable, and indestructible. The physical body may perish, but the soul remains unchanged. Krishna emphasizes that death is inevitable for the living and that the soul undergoes a cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. Therefore, Arjuna should not grieve for those who are about to die in battle, as their souls are eternal. Krishna's discourse on the immortality of the soul aims to dispel Arjuna's fear of death and destruction. Verses 31-37. The importance of duty, dharma. Krishna then shifts to the concept of dharma, or duty. He reminds Arjuna of his duty as a kshatriya, warrior, to fight in a righteous war. Failing to fulfill his duty would bring dishonor and sin. Krishna explains that engaging in his rightful duty without attachment to the results is the essence of righteous action. Arjuna is encouraged to rise above personal concerns and focus on his duty, understanding that true honor lies in performing one's dharma. Verses 38-53. The Yoga of Action, Karma Yoga. Krishna introduces the concept of Karma Yoga, the path of selfless action. He advises Arjuna to perform his duties without attachment to the fruits of his actions. Krishna teaches that one should act with a sense of detachment, maintaining equanimity in success and failure. This balanced approach to action leads to inner peace and spiritual growth. Krishna highlights that those who practice karma yoga rise above the dualities of life and attain a state of steady wisdom. Verses 54-72. The characteristics of a wise person, Sthita Prajna. In the final section of the chapter, Arjuna asks Krishna about the characteristics of a wise person who is steadfast in their wisdom, Sthita Prajna. Krishna describes such a person as one who has renounced all desires born of the mind and is content in the self alone. A wise person remains undisturbed by sorrow, desire, fear, and anger. They maintain a state of inner tranquility, regardless of external circumstances. Krishna explains that by controlling the senses and focusing the mind on the self, one can attain this state of wisdom and peace. If you like to listen all verses one by one, continue watching the video or skip to next chapter. Verse 1. Dhritarashtra asks Sanjaya to narrate what his sons and the sons of Pandu did when they assembled on the holy field of Kurukshetra, ready for battle. This sets the stage for the ensuing dialogue. Verse 2. Krishna, seeing Arjuna's sorrow and hesitation, chides him for succumbing to weakness and unmanliness. He urges Arjuna to cast off his faint-heartedness, emphasizing that it is not befitting a warrior of his caliber. Verse 3. Krishna implores Arjuna to overcome his impotence and prepare to fight, reminding him that his behavior is unbecoming of a noble warrior and will bring him dishonor. Verse 4. Arjuna, still conflicted, questions Krishna on how he can bring himself to fight against his revered elders like Bhishma and Dronacharya, whom he holds in high regard and reverence. Verse 5. Arjuna expresses his preference for living a life of begging rather than killing his noble teachers and elders. even if they are on the wrong side, as he believes their deaths would taint any victory. Verse 6. Arjuna is torn, unsure if victory or defeat is preferable. He confesses that he cannot see any good coming from the death of his kinsman, highlighting his deep moral and emotional confusion. Verse 7. Arjuna surrenders to Krishna, admitting his confusion and asking for guidance. He acknowledges Krishna as his spiritual teacher and requests Krishna to tell him decisively what is best for him. Verse 8. Arjuna continues to express his despondency, stating that even if he were to obtain an unrivaled kingdom or sovereignty over the gods, it would not dispel his sorrow. Verse 9. Sanjaya narrates that after expressing his doubts, Arjuna, in despair, sat down on his chariot, casting aside his bow and arrows, overwhelmed with sorrow. Verse 10. Krishna, smiling, begins to instruct the grief-stricken Arjuna, addressing his inner turmoil and preparing to impart the profound wisdom that forms the essence of the Bhagavad Gita. Verse 11. Krishna begins his teachings by chastising Arjuna for lamenting those who do not deserve to be grieved. He emphasizes that wise individuals do not grieve for the living or the dead. Verse 12. Krishna explains that there was never a time when he, Arjuna, or any of the assembled kings did not exist, nor will there be a time when they cease to exist, stressing the eternal nature of the soul. Verse 13. Just as the soul experiences childhood, youth, and old age within the body, it similarly transitions to another body after death. Therefore, wise individuals do not grieve over such changes. Verse 14. Krishna advises Arjuna to endure the temporary sensations of pleasure and pain, which arise from sensory perception. These sensations are fleeting and must be tolerated with equanimity. Verse 15. One who remains balanced and undisturbed by pleasure and pain, and who is steady in both, is fit for immortality according to Krishna. Verse 16. Krishna explains that the unreal has no existence, and the real never ceases to be. Those who have realized the truth know the distinction between the temporary body and the eternal soul. Verse 17. The indestructible, imperishable soul pervades the body. Krishna instructs Arjuna to fight, knowing that the soul is beyond destruction. Verse 18. Krishna states that the physical body, though destined to perish, houses the eternal, indestructible soul. Therefore, Arjuna should not mourn the body's demise. Verse 19. He who thinks the soul kills, or he who thinks the soul is killed, does not understand the true nature of the soul. The soul neither kills nor is killed. Verse 20. The soul is never born, nor does it die. It is eternal, undying, and primeval. The soul is not slain when the body is slain. Verse 21. Knowing the soul to be indestructible, eternal, unborn, and immutable, Krishna urges Arjuna to fight, as there is no reason to grieve for the body. Verse 22. Just as a person discards worn-out clothes and puts on new ones, the soul discards worn-out bodies and takes on new ones. Verse 23. The soul cannot be pierced by weapons, burned by fire, wet by water, or dried by the wind. It is immutable and indestructible. Verse 24. The soul is eternal, all-pervading, stable, immovable, and everlasting. It cannot be destroyed by any means. Verse 25. The soul is described as unmanifested, inconceivable, and unchangeable. Knowing this, Arjuna should not grieve. Verse 26. Even if Arjuna believes the soul to be perishable, there is still no reason to mourn, as death is inevitable for the born and rebirth is certain for the dead. Verse 27. Krishna reiterates that death is certain for the born and rebirth is inevitable for the dead. Therefore, Arjuna should not lament over the unavoidable. Verse 28. All beings are unmanifested before birth and after death. They become unmanifested again. They manifest only in the interim. Understanding this, Arjuna should not grieve. Verse 29. Some see the soul as a wonder. Some speak of it as a wonder. Others hear of it as a wonder, but even after hearing, none truly know it. Verse 30. The soul that dwells within all bodies is eternal and cannot be slain. Therefore, Arjuna should not mourn for any living being. Verse 31. Considering his own dharma as a warrior, Krishna tells Arjuna that there is no greater duty for him than to fight in a righteous war. Verse 32. If Arjuna fights, he will open the doors to heaven and attain fame. Such opportunities arise only for fortunate warriors, Krishna explains. Verse 33. If Arjuna refuses to fight this righteous battle, he will incur sin for neglecting his duty and will bring dishonor upon himself. Verse 34. People will speak of Arjuna's infamy forever. For a man of honor, dishonor is worse than death. Verse 35. The great warriors who hold Arjuna in high esteem will think he fled from the battlefield out of fear, thus demeaning his valor. Verse 36. Arjuna's enemies will ridicule him and mock his capabilities. Krishna emphasizes that such disgrace is unbearable for a warrior. Verse 37. If Arjuna fights and is killed, he will attain heaven. If he wins, he will enjoy the earth. Therefore, Krishna advises him to arise and fight with determination. Verse 38. Krishna instructs Arjuna to engage in battle, treating victory and defeat, gain and loss, pleasure and pain alike. By doing so, he will not incur sin. Verse 39. Krishna introduces the concept of Sankhya, the path of knowledge, and Karma Yoga, the path of selfless action. Acting without attachment leads to liberation. Verse 40. Krishna assures Arjuna that in this path no effort is wasted and no harm is done. Even a little progress on this path protects one from great fear. Verse 41. The resolute mind is focused on one goal. The thoughts of the irresolute are many-branched and endless. Verse 42. Krishna criticizes those who are attached to the flowery words of the Vedas, which promise pleasures and power. Verse 43. Such people who are obsessed with material gains and pleasures lack the resolute mind necessary for spiritual understanding. Verse 44. The desire for material enjoyment and power blinds people to true wisdom and the goal of life. Verse 45. Krishna urges Arjuna to transcend the three gunas, modes of nature, and be established in the self, free from dualities and concerned only with the eternal. Verse 46. Just as a reservoir serves all purposes of small wells, a person established in the self achieves the ultimate goal, fulfilling all desires and duties. Verse 47. Krishna advises Arjuna to perform his duty without attachment to the results. One has the right to work, but not to the fruits of work. Verse 48. By performing actions with a steady mind and without attachment to success or failure, Arjuna can attain equanimity, which is the essence of yoga. Verse 49. Action done with a self-centered mindset is far inferior to selfless action. Krishna urges Arjuna to seek refuge in wisdom and avoid attachment. Verse 50. A person who acts with wisdom and detachment can free themselves from the bondage of actions and attain a state of bliss. Verse 51. The wise, acting without attachment, achieve liberation from the cycle of birth and death and reach the ultimate state of peace. Verse 52. When one's intellect transcends the confusion of illusion, they become indifferent to the doctrines of the Vedas, focusing on the eternal truth. Verse 53. A steadfast intellect, unwavering amidst conflicting thoughts, allows one to attain the state of yoga, leading to ultimate peace and liberation. Verse 54. Arjuna asks Krishna about the characteristics of a person who is firmly established in wisdom and steady in their mind. Verse 55. Krishna describes that such a person has renounced all desires born of the mind and is content in the self alone, regardless of external circumstances. Verse 56. A wise person remains undisturbed by adversity, free from desire and attachment, and devoid of fear and anger. Verse 57. Such a person is not attached to pleasure or pain, understanding both as temporary and remaining unaffected by external events. Verse 58. When one withdraws their senses from sense objects, just as a tortoise withdraws its limbs, they attain steady wisdom. Verse 59. Sense objects cease to attract a person who has tasted the higher taste of the self, even if the sense organs remain active. Verse 60. The senses are so powerful that they can forcibly carry away even the mind of a discerning person who strives to control them. Verse 61. Krishna advises Arjuna to control his senses and focus his mind on the self, as this leads to steady wisdom. Verse 62. Attachment to sense objects arises from contemplating them. This leads to desire, and unfulfilled desire breeds anger. Verse 63. Anger leads to delusion. Delusion results in loss of memory. Loss of memory causes the destruction of discernment, and loss of discernment leads to ruin. Verse 64. A person with disciplined senses, free from attachment and aversion, attains the grace of God and the peace that follows. Verse 65. One who attains inner peace has their sorrows destroyed and intellect firmly established. Verse 66. Without a disciplined mind and senses, there can be no peace, and without peace, there can be no happiness. Verse 67. The mind that follows the wandering senses leads one away from wisdom, like a ship driven off course by the wind. Verse 68. Therefore, Krishna advises Arjuna to control his senses, as doing so leads to steadfast wisdom. Verse 69. What is night for all beings is the time of awakening for the self-controlled. What is the time of awakening for others is night for the sage who sees. Verse 70. A wise person remains peaceful like the ocean, which remains undisturbed even as rivers flow into it. Desires enter, but do not disturb the person who is free from longing. Verse 71. One who gives up all desires and lives free from longing, without the sense of I and mine, attains peace. Verse 72. This is the state of a person established in Brahman. Reaching this state, one is not bewildered. Being established in this state even at the hour of death, one attains liberation from the cycle of birth and death. Thank you for watching my video. Please like and subscribe my channel for more videos.